Hello there! Boss battles are the most entertaining moments in games. The moments when everything you've learned up to this point are tested and you're rewarded with glory, satisfaction and great loot upon completion. However, some bosses can ruin our day and be a living nightmare. Here are those, the toughest bosses we have faced, and please be warned, there's a very personal list. Okay, we know that technically we could make an entire list of bosses from the Souls series, so we're limiting ourselves to only 2 entries. At number 10, we would have to mention Manus, the final boss from Dark Souls 1 DLC, Artorias of the Abyss. What made Manus so challenging in comparison to other bosses was his unpredictability and speed. Despite facing him numerous times, we still couldn't learn to anticipate his chaotic moves or understand his patterns. Similarly to the Dancer from Dark Souls 3, which was a bit like that. The fight with Manus could have been easier if you summoned Sif, the Phantom of the Great Grey Wolf, but we didn't want to do that, as we didn't want to see him die again. Well, that might come as a surprise to you, as many consider Gurdy in Binding of Isaac to be one of the easier bosses. However, that wasn't the case for us. Gurdy is the type of boss that requires you to keep your surroundings in mind. It's not like she's hard, she's just really frustrating at times. Consider the spawn, flies and flurry of projectiles and you have probably the worst boss in the entire game. Fun fact, initially Gurdy was supposed to be made of child corpses, but was eventually changed to be made of guts. Hooray! The Persona series has a lot of memorable boss fights, but the one with Mitsuo's shadow is one simply we can't forget, in the negative way. Mitsuo is a certain type of an annoying JRPG boss, the one that has a death spell. Sure, we can bring our allies back, but Persona 4 is a game in which the death of a hero results in instant failure. And oh boy, did that drive us nuts. Sure, a strategy is important here and a little grinding doesn't hurt, but our success while fighting Mitsuo was based on a great deal on luck, which made the fight that much harder. Going back to the classic Mortal Kombat nowadays, Goro isn't that hard to beat. However, back in the 90s, when most of us were still kids, Goro was a nightmare. A 4-armed mountain of meat with intimidating looks. Along with powerful attacks, the difficulty of this boss came in the form of a psychological barrier of sorts. Most of us didn't expect an enemy like that, back in the era of the arcades and the first fighting games. Since then, Goro became a mascot of sorts of this brutal franchise, but he isn't that scary anymore, and good for us. JRPGs like Final Fantasy are ripe with optional bosses and additional content for the most hardcore of players. If we manage to clear an insanely difficult optional boss in a game like that, we're rewarded with great prizes. One of the optional bosses from the franchise that was the hardest for us was the Emerald Weapon in Final Fantasy VII. Sure, nowadays you can find strategies how to beat this behemoth, but back in the day, it was nearly impossible to defeat him. Why, you ask? Well, most of all, he had 1 million life points. A lot, isn't it? Furi is the newest game on our list. This indie title consists entirely of boss fights, a lot like Shadow of the Colossus, with battles having various stages and part of the fun coming from learning how to best the enemy we are fighting. For us, the most difficult adversary was the Burst, a sniper boss. Just like with any long-ranged boss like that, be it the End from MGS3 or Quiet from Phantom Pain, the biggest problem is getting near the boss. Part of the difficulty also comes from having to be watchful of our surroundings. However, if we practice long enough, Burst is beatable, and you FPS fans don't have to take my word for it, what fun it is to finally kick a sniper's ass. Just like in Dark Souls, Capcom's action RPG Dragon's Dogma has a lot of great boss battles. Our title of the most frustrating boss from the game goes to Cockatrice, who is a basilisk of sorts. The most annoying thing about this battle is that our opponent has an ability to turn our character, as well as our party members, into stone. And sure, you can bring some potions that can reverse the process, but when the said potions eventually end, there's a high chance you might rage quit. There's something infuriating about not being able to move and seeing your character being ripped to shreds while you can't do anything about it. We hope to see less bosses like that, because there's nothing worse than feeling utterly helpless. Bosses from Guerrilla Games' Killzone franchise aren't that memorable, but one of them is hard to forget. Radec from Killzone 2 is a type of quote-unquote boss that throws an entire army at us before we can even lay a finger on him. At a certain point, the battle becomes easy, and the best way to do it, apart from what you may think, is to resort to the knife, as it is much faster and efficient. Radec is simply annoying because of the fight design, how much time it takes, and mostly importantly, the weapon's low efficiency and the game's sometimes unresponsive controls. The visually stunning boss battles of Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance were the highlight of Konami and Platinum's futuristic slasher. Overall, boss battles in Platinum games like Bayonetta are quite fair and balance the fine line between a challenge and a chore. What made the final encounter in Metal Gear Rising so hard was the efficiency of the boss. Armstrong was fast, he was powerful, he had some tricks up his sleeve, could dodge as well as counter our attacks, and was not to be taken lightly. The finale put all that we had learned to the test, with one of the most demanding boss battles in video game history. Well, at the start of this video I promised you 2 bosses from the Souls franchise, but that was technically a lie. Our battle with Ornstein and Smough from Dark Souls 1 consists of 3 boss battles, while the final one depending from who we slayed first. Sure, multiple bosses weren't anything new in the franchise, but the final fight in Anor Londo took that to the next level. One of the enemies was fast and aggressive, the other was slow but tough. When we killed either Ornstein or Smough, the one remaining would transform and receive the power-up from the corpse of his buddy. Back in the day, when we were playing Dark Souls 1 before its release, to make it in time for the review, this fight was something we haven't seen before, and there weren't many tutorials or phantoms to aid us, so it was the moment when we started to question whether or not we'll make it in time for the deadline. The difficulty of a boss is clearly subjective, based on our individual skills, habits, or even playstyles, and that is what makes talking about bosses so much fun. An easy opponent for once, maybe a toughest boss ever for some. Please let me know in the comment section below what your toughest bosses were, and stay tuned for more content from GamePressure.com. I'm Jordan, see you around.